My husband cheated, and his mistress told his coworkers I was the problem. I 40F, never thought I would be sharing my story here, but life has a funny way of surprising you. My husband of 15 years and I have always had a strong, loving relationship. We have 2 beautiful children together and have built a life filled with love and happiness. However, a few months ago, I discovered that my husband had been having an affair with a woman from his office. I was devastated, heartbroken, and felt like my world had been turned upside down. I struggled to come to terms with the betrayal and the lies. But as I began to process my emotions and work through the pain, I stumbled upon something unexpected. I found a new sense of strength and independence that I never knew I had. I started to rediscover myself and my passions, and I began to see the world in a whole new light. I'm not saying that infidelity is ever okay or that it doesn't hurt, but for me, it was a wake-up call that led to personal growth and self-discovery. I'm now in a place where I can look back on this experience with a sense of clarity and understanding. Has anyone else experienced something similar? I would love to hear your stories and insights. But let me back up and actually tell you the whole story, because the ending, the part where I supposedly went too far, is exactly why I'm posting this here tonight with a glass of wine and shaking hands. My name is Claire. My husband's name is Daniel. We met when I was 24 and he was 26 at a friend's backyard barbecue in the kind of summer that you spend the rest of your life trying to recreate. He was tall, funny, and he laughed at my jokes even when they weren't that good. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, got married, bought a house in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, had our daughter Mia, then our son Tyler, and for a long time, a genuinely long time, I thought we had built something real. I was a graphic designer before the kids came. I was good at it, too. I had clients who specifically requested me, a small but loyal portfolio, and a creative energy that felt like the most honest part of who I was. Then life happened the way life tends to happen when nobody's paying close enough attention. Mia needed more than we expected in her early years, nothing catastrophic, just enough that I started taking fewer projects. Then Tyler came, and the freelance work slowed to a trickle, and then to nothing, and somehow without any single dramatic decision being made, I became a full-time stay-at-home mom while Daniel climbed the ladder at his marketing firm. I want to be clear, I didn't resent it, not at first. I genuinely loved being present for my kids. I loved the school pickups and the craft projects and the Saturday morning pancakes shaped like animals. But somewhere around year 10 of our marriage, I started to feel like I had quietly disappeared from the story of my own life. I was Claire the mom, Claire the wife, Claire who volunteers at the bake sale. The woman who used to stay up until 2 in the morning, perfecting a logo concept, because she cared so deeply about getting it exactly right. She had gone somewhere. And I didn't even notice she was missing until everything fell apart. The first sign that something was wrong with Daniel came about 8 months ago, and I genuinely did not recognize it for what it was. He started working late. Not dramatically late, not stumbling in at midnight reeking of perfume late, just an extra hour here, an extra hour there. He'd text around 6 saying a meeting ran long, or that he needed to finish a proposal. I believed him without a second thought because that was the kind of wife I was. I trusted him completely. I had always trusted him completely. Then came the phone thing. Daniel had never been particularly protective of his phone before. It sat on the kitchen counter when he got home from work. He'd leave it on the coffee table while he helped Tyler with homework. He'd sometimes hand it to Mia to look something up. But gradually, and I mean so gradually that I genuinely cannot pinpoint when it changed, he started keeping it on his person at all times. Pocket when he was home. Nightstand on his side when we were in bed. He'd take it into the bathroom when he showered, something he'd never done before. I noticed, but I told myself a story about it. Work stress. A big account. Maybe a surprise he was planning for our anniversary. I was very good at telling myself stories back then. I had been doing it for years without realizing it. The second sign came at a dinner party at our neighbor's house, Rick and Sandra, who live 2 doors down and throw these wonderfully chaotic get-togethers every couple of months. We were all standing around in their kitchen, drinks in hand, and someone brought up a restaurant downtown that had recently opened. A really nice place, date night level. And Sandra turned to me and said, "Oh, Claire, didn't Daniel take you there a few weeks ago? He mentioned it at the neighborhood watch meeting." I laughed and said, "No, that must have been someone else." Because Daniel and I had not been to that restaurant, I would have remembered. We hadn't had a proper date night in months. Sandra looked briefly confused, then smiled and moved on to another topic, and I stood there holding my glass of wine with this odd hollow feeling settling somewhere behind my sternum. Daniel was across the room, and when I looked at him, he was already looking at me, just for a split second, and then he looked away and laughed at something Rick said, and the moment passed. But I kept thinking about it on the drive home. Daniel took someone to that restaurant. Someone he'd mentioned to Rick at the neighborhood watch meeting, probably in passing, probably the way you mention things when you're not thinking carefully about the web you're building. He hadn't taken me. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd taken a client. Maybe Sandra had misunderstood. But the hollow feeling didn't go away, and a seed had been planted that I couldn't quite uproot no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. The confirmation came on a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after that dinner party. The kids were at school. I was home alone, doing laundry, and Daniel's old gym bag was sitting in the corner of our bedroom closet where it had been sitting for months untouched. I wasn't snooping. I want to be really clear about that, not because I think snooping would have been unjustified in hindsight, but because I genuinely wasn't. I was reorganizing the closet shelf above it, and the bag shifted when I moved a box, and something fell out of the unzipped front pocket. It was a receipt from that restaurant Sandra had mentioned, dated about 6 weeks prior, dinner for 2, a bottle of wine, 2 desserts, $214. I sat down on the edge of the bed with that receipt in my hand, and I stared at it for a very long time. My heart was doing something strange, not racing exactly, more like stuttering, like a car engine trying to turn over in cold weather. I kept thinking, there's an explanation. There's an explanation. But I couldn't make myself believe it this time. I did what I assume many people in my position do. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. I wasn't dramatic about it. I didn't hire a private investigator or install tracking apps. I just watched. And once I was watching, things I'd been casually registering for months suddenly snapped into a very different focus. He was texting more than usual and angling his phone away from me. He'd started going to the gym on Wednesday evenings, which was new, and he'd shower immediately when he got home, before even saying hello to the kids. He'd become slightly more attentive to me in certain ways, bringing home flowers twice in the span of a month when he'd barely done it in years, which I now understand is one of the classic guilt behaviors. He'd also started mentioning a coworker named Ashley in casual conversation. Ashley had this idea in the meeting today. Ashley was saying that restaurant downtown is overrated, with just enough frequency that it had the opposite effect of what he probably intended. Instead of establishing her as a normal, unremarkable fixture of his work life, it made her neon bright in my mind. I googled her. I'm not proud of it, but I did. She had a LinkedIn. She was 31. She was pretty in the way that makes you feel both unsurprised and devastated at the same time. She'd been at Daniel's firm for about a year. I spent 2 days in a kind of suspended state, functioning, making lunches, helping with homework, folding laundry, while my internal world was completely unraveling. I cried in the shower twice. I went for a walk one morning and sat on a bench in the park for 45 minutes just staring at the pond because I genuinely couldn't make myself stand up and go home. I felt like I was grieving something that hadn't officially ended yet, which is a specific and horrible kind of grief that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Then I found the emails. I hadn't been planning to look at his laptop, but he'd left it open on the kitchen counter one morning before leaving for work, something he almost never did, and he'd stepped outside to warm up the car, and I was standing right there, and the email client was open, and there was a thread at the top of the inbox from Ashley with the subject line, "Last night." I read it, the whole thread. It went back 4 months. I'm not going to go into detail about the content because honestly, even now, that part still feels like pressing on a bruise. What I will say is that it was unambiguous. It was not platonic. It was not a work friendship that had gotten slightly too flirty. It was a full, ongoing, deliberately concealed relationship. There were references to specific evenings. I remembered nights he'd said he was working late or out with colleagues. There were expressions of what certainly looked like genuine feeling on both sides. There was a moment in one of the emails where he described our marriage as not bad, just empty. And I think that was the sentence that broke something open in me completely. Not bad, just empty. I put the laptop back exactly as I found it. I walked to the bathroom, closed the door, sat on the tile floor, and I cried in a way I don't think I had cried since my father passed away 8 years ago. The ugly, gasping, completely uncontrolled kind of crying. Then I washed my face. I got the kids off to school, and I spent the entire day deciding what I was going to do. I confronted him that night after the kids were in bed. I had thought about waiting, about gathering more information, about consulting a lawyer first, and I did eventually do that last one. But in the moment, sitting across the dinner table from him while he asked how my day was, I just couldn't sustain it anymore. I said, "I know about Ashley." The color drained from his face so completely and so instantly that it almost would have been funny under other circumstances. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Claire's." I read the emails, I said. I was surprisingly calm. I had expected to be screaming, but I wasn't. I was eerily, deeply calm in a way that I think scared him more than yelling would have. 4 months, Daniel, at least 4 months that I know of. He didn't deny it. I'll give him that. He didn't insult me by trying to gaslight me or invent some alternate explanation. He just put his elbows on the table and dropped his head into his hands and said, "I'm so sorry." What followed was one of the most surreal conversations of my life. He said it had started as a friendship that he hadn't meant to let go where it went. He said he was confused. He said he loved me. He said he didn't know what he wanted. He said he was sorry. He said that part a lot. He did not say it was over with Ashley, which I noticed. I pointed that out, and he got quiet in a way that told me everything I needed to know about where his head actually was. I asked him to sleep in the guest room that night. He did. I called my best friend Lauren the next morning while the kids were at school, and she drove over within 20 minutes and we sat in my kitchen, and she held my hand while I told her everything. Lauren has been my best friend since college. She is ferociously loyal, and she has an extremely low tolerance for nonsense, and she spent a solid 10 minutes saying things about Daniel that I won't repeat here, but that I privately found somewhat cathartic. Then I called a divorce attorney. His name was Gary. He'd been recommended by a woman in my neighborhood who'd used him 2 years prior, and he was straightforward and kind, and he walked me through what I was looking at. I wasn't impulsive about it. I took 2 weeks of Daniel sleeping in the guest room, of awkward dinners where we both performed normalcy for the kids, of him swinging between desperate apologies and a weird defensive silence, before I told him I wanted a divorce. He did not take that well. He cried, he begged. He said he had ended things with Ashley, and look, maybe he had, I don't know, but the damage was not something that could be patched over with a conversation and some tears. That email. Not bad, just empty. I kept coming back to that. It wasn't just that he'd had an affair. It was that he had looked at our life, our 15 years, our family, and quietly decided it wasn't enough. And instead of talking to me, instead of saying, "Claire, I'm unhappy, something needs to change," He'd just gone and found something on the side and kept cashing in on the comfort and stability of our marriage while doing it. I couldn't get past that. I didn't want to. His parents were not happy with me. His mother, Diane, called me about a week after Daniel told his family. She's a woman who has strong opinions about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of working through difficulties, and she expressed those opinions at length and with considerable volume. She said that I was throwing away 15 years. She said the children needed their family intact. She said that people make mistakes, and that I needed to find it in my heart to forgive. She did not, notably, spend much time on the part where her son had been lying to me for at minimum 4 months. I listened to all of it. Then I said, very quietly, Diane, I love you and I'm not going to argue with you about this. And I got off the phone and allowed myself exactly 1 minute to be furious before I moved on. My own mother was more supportive, though she had her moments of what I can only describe as gentle pressure. She kept saying things like, have you considered counseling, just to make sure? And I had considered it. Daniel had suggested it. But every time I thought about sitting in a therapist's office and trying to rebuild something with a man who had described our marriage as not bad, just empty, I felt a kind of spiritual exhaustion that told me pretty clearly where I actually stood. Here's the part I didn't expect, and the part that I imagine might make some people uncomfortable. About 6 weeks after Daniel moved out into an apartment across town, I started to feel okay. Not every day, and not all the time, and there were still nights when I cried and mornings, when I woke up with that hollow ache in my chest and moments, when I watched Mia and Tyler watch a movie together on the couch, and felt a grief for the family structure we were dismantling that was almost physical. I don't want to minimize any of that. But underneath it, running quietly beneath all of it like a current, was something else. Something that felt, embarrassingly, a lot like relief. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Small things at first. I bought canvases and paint because I used to paint in college, and had stopped entirely somewhere in the fog of new parenthood. I rearranged the living room furniture the way I had always wanted it, and nobody commented on it or pushed back. I started going on morning walks, and listening to podcasts about design, and art, and things that had nothing to do with school schedules or grocery lists. I called old friends I'd lost touch with. I laughed more than I expected to. And then, and this is where the story gets complicated, and where some people in my life have suggested I crossed a line, I started reaching out about freelance work again. I put together a simple portfolio website. I emailed 3 former clients to let them know I was available, and almost immediately, one of them wrote back with a project, a full branding package for a small restaurant that was opening downtown. It was exactly the kind of work I used to love. I took it. Working on that project felt like finding a room in my own house that had been locked for a decade. I stayed up late not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I cared about every detail in a way I hadn't cared about anything in years. Mia noticed and said, Mom, you seem different lately. And when I asked her what she meant, she said, happier, I think. Like you're doing something you actually like. She is 13, and occasionally she says things that stop me completely. The branding project led to 2 more. I started making money again, which mattered practically as the divorce proceedings dragged on, but more than that it mattered because it was mine. It was something that existed because of me, not in spite of me, or alongside me, or as the backdrop to someone else's story. Now here's where the aita part actually comes in. Bear with me, because this is the part my sister-in-law Rachel thinks makes me vindictive, and the part Daniel apparently can't believe I did, and the part I'm now lying awake at night second-guessing. About 2 months after Daniel moved out, I found out through a mutual acquaintance, not through snooping, just through the small-townish gossip network of suburban Ohio, that Ashley had been telling people at the firm a version of events in which I was essentially the villain. The cold, disconnected wife. The woman who had checked out years ago. The reason Daniel had been so unhappy. I want to be careful here, because I only heard this secondhand, and I don't know exactly what she said, or in what context, but the gist of it was that their relationship had been some kind of justified response to my inadequacy as a partner. I sat with that for about 2 weeks. I went back and forth on it. Lauren said to let it go, that it didn't matter what Ashley's coworkers thought of me. My therapist, yes, I had started seeing a therapist, not for the marriage but for myself, said something similar about protecting my own energy. But the thing is, Daniel was still at that firm. And there were people there who knew both of us, people we'd socialized with at company events over the years, people whose opinion of me had potentially been quietly poisoned by a narrative that wasn't true. So I reached out to one person at the firm. Just one. Daniel's direct colleague and the closest thing he had to a work best friend, a guy named Marcus who had been a groomsman at our wedding, and who I had always genuinely liked and considered a friend in his own right. I sent him a message. I told him, calmly and without hysteria, that I was aware of the version of events being circulated, and that I wanted him to know, as someone who had known both of us for years, that our marriage had not been empty from my side. That I had not checked out. That I had loved Daniel and trusted him completely, which was exactly why the affair had blindsided me the way it did. I didn't ask Marcus to say anything to anyone. I didn't ask him to take sides. I just told him the truth and let him do whatever he wanted with it. Marcus responded warmly. He said he was sorry for what I was going through. He said he appreciated me reaching out. Daniel found out about the message. I assume Marcus told him, which is fair, and he was furious. He called me and said that I was stirring the pot at his workplace, and that I needed to stay out of his professional life, and that what I'd done was completely inappropriate. He said I was making things harder than they needed to be. He said I was being vindictive. I told him that I hadn't asked Marcus to do anything, that I had simply shared my perspective with a mutual friend. He said that wasn't the point, and that I knew what I was doing. And honestly, I don't know if he's entirely wrong. Because here's the thing I've been sitting with. Part of me absolutely did want Daniel to know that I hadn't just quietly accepted the narrative that justified what he did. Part of me wanted him to feel some small fraction of the exposure I had felt when I read those emails. Part of me wanted Ashley's colleagues to know that the version of me she'd apparently been circulating was a construction, not a person. Was that vindictive? Maybe, probably a little. Was it proportionate? I genuinely don't know. Rachel, Daniel's sister, who has always been warmer to me than his mother but who is ultimately his family, texted me after the Marcus situation and said that she thought I was handling this badly and that I needed to take the high road if I wanted to move forward with my life in a healthy way. She said that reaching out to Marcus had been a power move and that it wasn't a good look. I've thought about that. I've genuinely thought about it. The high road, the dignified silence, the woman who rises above. But I keep coming back to this. Daniel got to have a 4-month affair. He got to eat a $200 dinner with another woman. He got to send emails describing our marriage as empty. He got to walk out of our family home and into an apartment, and apparently, allow a narrative to take root among his colleagues, in which I bore some of the responsibility for what he did. And the one time I said to one person, "That's not true and I want you to know it," that's the moment I'm supposed to take the high road. I don't know, I really don't know. What I do know is this. I am 40 years old and I am sitting at my own kitchen table, at 11 o'clock at night, working on a logo for a client who chose me specifically, and my kids are asleep upstairs. And tomorrow morning I am going to make them breakfast and take Mia to her volleyball practice and help Tyler with the history project he's been procrastinating on, and I am going to do all of it as myself. As Claire, fully and completely, not as the supporting character in someone else's story. And that feels like something. It feels like a lot, actually. But still, the message to Marcus, the thing I did that everyone seems to have an opinion about. I need to ask, was I justified in reaching out to a mutual friend to share my side of the story, in the face of a narrative I had no other way of addressing? Or did I cross a line by inserting myself into my soon-to-be ex-husband's professional world? Did I handle it with reasonable self-respect? Or was I, as Rachel and Daniel both suggested, being vindictive, making things harder than they needed to be, and failing to take the high road I should have been walking? I've gone back and forth on it so many times that the question has lost its shape. So I'm putting it here, to strangers, because sometimes strangers are the most honest audience you've got. So, am I the asshole for reaching out to Marcus, knowing full well that Daniel would find out, knowing full well what it might cost me in terms of the graceful exit everyone seemed to expect from me,